Hello and welcome to this, the first of a new series of webinars that we at P2 Consulting will be giving over the coming weeks and months. It's going to be a half-hour talk, this time looking at portfolio management, and what we're going to look to do is explore the whys, the whats and the hows of portfolio management. Half an hour is not a huge amount of time. But we'll look to try and answer questions as best we can. So do feel free to write in questions if you want them answered. Any we don't get to during the session, I will drop a note out to the asker afterwards and look to answer it then and there. So do feel free to drop them if and when you've got a chance. We are recording this, so at the end of the session, we'll be emailing out the recording, so you can listen to that at your leisure in the future. And this is the first time we've done this, so any feedback or advice or recommendations would be very gratefully received. So without further ado, let's get on with it. For those who have not come across P2 before, we're a transformation consultancy. We set ourselves up about 7 years ago to be a genuine alternative to the Big Four. So that's really who we are, but more interestingly, what is it that we do? Well, we focus on 3 areas of transformation. We look to help organizations deliver on 3 promises. We look to improve, control, and deliver their transformation agenda. Improvement is all about doing change faster and more efficiently. Control is all about achieving the promises made to customers, to shareholders, and so on and so forth. And deliver is really about just getting yourself over the line. But we're going to talk about one very specific service today, portfolio design. That's a service that's very close to my professional heart. I, as well as being director of consulting for P2, have been working around the portfolio space for about 15, 20 years now. I'm co-chair of the APM's Portfolio Management Committee, and I'm also co-author of the APM's Guide to Portfolio Management, which we'll look at it a bit later on in this session. And I love portfolio management. I find it absolutely fascinating as a concept. Really interestingly, you'll find that there is no right answer when you're doing portfolio management because it's so intrinsically linked to the strategy of each and every organization. But there are a lot of wrong answers, but we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So what are we going to try and do today? Well, we're going to look at the what of portfolio management. We're going to look at the how of portfolio management, but we're going to begin by looking at the why of portfolio management. So why do we have this thing called portfolio management, and where does it come from? Well, if you jump back 30 years or so, change management focused very much on project management. Essentially, how do I deliver? How do I get these project deliverables over the line? There's a huge amount of focus and a huge amount of work in that. But about 15 years ago, roughly about the same time as the Agile revolution started to come online, from the financial sector, the question started to be asked, which was, well, great that we're doing these projects, but are they the right project to do based on the strategy of the organization? So whereas up until this point we'd focused on doing the thing right, are we delivering these projects successfully? It's about 15 years ago we started to ask the question, are we doing the right thing? Are we selecting the best projects to deliver? And that was driven by a really very simple mathematical position. If you have £100 of change budget and your projects are delivering 75% of the value of what they set out to deliver, then you might think that what you're delivering is £75 worth of value. But there's actually a very important extra angle to that, because if those projects are only delivering 75% of things that are useful to the organization, you're actually delivering considerably less than that. You're actually only delivering around 50% of the value. So out of every £100 spent on change, you only end up delivering 50% or £50 worth of value, which is of course £50 lost. So that started people thinking about how can we get better at making sure we are selecting the best projects to deliver. And doing the thing right focused very much on what we think of as project and program management. But doing the right thing is what we began to call portfolio management. Now, it's usually at this point I ask for a show of hands about how much of an organization's change budget they think is spent on doing the thing right and doing the right thing. And it's often very far below the 75% mark. So imagine how little value one gets from one's change budget if one is ignoring portfolio management. It is quite significant. So if that's why we do portfolio management, what does it actually look like? Well, at this point, I quite like to look at definitions. And the definitions I tend to pull on are definition of program management, which I found in the Managing Successful Programs guide. They define program management as the action of coordinating, organizing, directing, and implementing a temporary flexible organization that consists of a dossier of projects and transformational activities to achieve outcomes and realize benefits of strategic importance to the business. Whereas portfolio management, and this is as identified by the Association of Project Management's Book of Knowledge, is defined as the selection, prioritization, and control of an organization's projects and programs in line with its strategic objectives and capacity to deliver. The goal is to balance change initiatives and business as usual while optimizing return on investment. This is a continuous process to achieve the evolving strategy of the organization. So an awful lot of words there. Well, let's break that down. Let's find out what's similar between those two definitions. Well, firstly, and probably most critically, they both focus on the coordination and control of various projects and programs. And they both focus very critically on delivering the strategic objectives of the organization. So coordination and control, project alignment, and strategic objectives and focus. But when you start to look at the differences, you start to see why portfolio management varies from program management. It's probably the most critical first difference with portfolio management is that it focuses on the selection and prioritization of those projects and programs, whereas program management is purely about the control and delivery. It's about balancing the change initiatives and making sure they balance to deliver business as usual while optimizing return on investment. And then this is a really interesting one because, as we all know, programs are essentially about delivering something over a short period of time. So it's a temporary organization you're setting up, whereas a portfolio is about supporting the organization to continuously deliver its transformation. So the portfolio office is a permanent function. That seems like a small factor to pull on, but actually you'll find, and we'll come to later, most of the challenges around portfolio management derive from the fact that program management is temporary, whereas portfolio management is essentially a permanent activity. So if we look at those in a bit more detail, we'll see that the similarities focus on command and control and strategic objectives, whereas the differences focus on the fact that portfolio management has a very large element of selection, prioritization, and optimization, and a very important aspect around being permanent versus temporary. So if that's the what is portfolio management at a high level, I'm going to dive down now into two key aspects of portfolio management. Firstly, looking at the prioritization and optimization aspect of portfolio management, and secondly, at the coordination and control aspect of portfolio management. So, prioritization and optimization. If you jump back 10 to 15 years and somebody told you they were a portfolio management, essentially the prioritization aspect would be the entirety of their job. The single role of the portfolio manager would be to balance out the cost of the portfolio against the benefits as they align to the strategic goals. And the job of that portfolio manager would essentially be continually trying to agree what the strategic goals of the organization was, trying to allocate value to those strategic goals, trying to see what value was going to be delivered by the potential change portfolio, and then aligning that to cost so that they're creating a prioritized portfolio for delivery. If you move on a few more years, though, actually the cost benefit aspect developed. And we started to bring into the picture the risk aspect. What I mean by risk is essentially all projects and programs have an element of risk, have an element of achievability in them. And if you're genuinely building an optimized portfolio, what you're essentially trying to do is balance the cost and the achievability on the downside against the value on the upside. You're essentially trying to balance out those three different metrics to provide you with an optimized portfolio. Now, that's actually a really important point because quite often it's considerably easier to identify the risk aspect of a portfolio than it is to identify the cost aspect, or at least the risk aspect is considerably more reliable. We tend to have a better gut feel of what is achievable and what isn't achievable than we do around what something is ultimately going to cost us. So if I was to drop then to suggest what my top two tips are around prioritization and optimization of the portfolio, I think first one would be, actually it sounds quite hard to optimize a portfolio, but it's one of these situations where a small amount of portfolio management is considerably better than no portfolio management at all. And it's actually relatively easy with a bit of focus to get a group of people in the room and get an estimate of the relative achievability of one's portfolio against the value that's to be delivered by it. I'd also suggest that actually probably the best place to start is around risk achievability, because it's often considerably more reliable and easier to do than the cost side of things. So that's one of the what's of portfolio management: prioritize and then optimization. The other what of portfolio management I wanted to focus on was the aspect of coordination and control. Now, this is a much more recent development in portfolio management, and actually there's a whole range of different terms people use to refer to it. I use the term portfolio delivery assurance, and I use the definition that we're trying to reduce the delivery risk of the portfolio. Now, there's a wide range of ways you can do that, and the really important thing about this is that what you're not trying to do is replace the role of the project or the program manager. They will have a much better view of what's going on inside their own projects and programs. However, the role of the portfolio manager in this space is to act a bit like the air traffic controller, to sit above that activity and spot the things that are likely to go wrong that the project or program manager cannot see from their point of view. A couple of really obvious examples around that I always like to lean on. For instance, dependency alignment. Actually, you can only really see key dependencies between projects and programs, both in terms of each other and in terms of key resources such as testing frameworks and the like from above. Actually, doing dependency alignment is incredibly important. Capacity and capability. At the portfolio level, it's considerably easier to look at the entire resource requirements of the change portfolio and agree what internal resource will be used, what external resource will be used. Also capability, that's around training, it's around tools, it's around being essentially the center of excellence for what change tools, what change training that portfolio of people can draw on. Roadmap, obviously a classic one that the portfolio will try and create. This isn't just about knowing what's supposed to happen when, it's really about trying to understand when the go lives are and then managing those go lives into the business. Because again, similar to dependency management, it's actually only at the portfolio level you can really see what's going to hit the business and whether they're going to be ready to receive that change. And change maturity, and actually a lot of portfolio functions these days take a role around looking at the general maturity of the different parts of the organization in terms of change, and take a very active role in trying to raise that. All activities that are not linked specifically to prioritization, but are fundamental at the portfolio level for reducing the risk of delivering that portfolio. So for me, the what of portfolio management really falls into those two boxes: the optimization box and the delivery assurance box. So let's look a bit at how you do portfolio management. And here there are a wide range of potential options and right answers one can pull from. I've pulled out 5 that I find quite interesting. What you're looking at the moment is the principles of management of portfolio, which is really the granddaddy of all portfolio approaches, pulled together by Steve Jenner and Craig Kilford back in 2011. Actually, I dropped Steve a note this morning because I was under the impression it had come out much earlier. It seems to have been around for a lot longer, but apparently it's only arrived in 2011. But as I said, this is a real granddaddy of portfolio approaches, driven from the government space, very popular in the government sector. What this is entirely trying to do is really drive portfolio management from principle position. It's essentially saying there are a range of principles one needs to deliver in the portfolio space to be successful, and to deliver what he called the portfolio cycle, which is that definition and delivery cycle driven by energy in the organization. And he pulls out 5 key principles. Senior management commitment, governance alignment, so ensuring that both the portfolio and the organizational governance are aligned. Strategy alignment, critically understanding the strategy of the organization, the value that drops out of that strategy, and making sure that the transformation is aligned to that strategy. The portfolio office to drive all of this, and of course, an energized culture, which ensures that everybody is getting involved, and without which portfolio management doesn't get off the ground. Probably the most important thing to draw the attention to here is the senior management commitment. And if you look at pretty much all portfolio management approaches, they vary in a lot of ways, but actually they all draw back to senior management commitment and the really critical need to have senior stakeholder engagement. So management of portfolios, hugely popular, still very, very highly respected principle-based approach. Now this next model is what I call a process-based approach, because it's essentially breaking down the portfolio journey into a series of process steps. This is the Associated Project Management model, and this is the one that comes out of our recent guide, Practitioner's Guide to Portfolio Management. What this model is trying to do is carve out the very specific steps that one would want to go through to manage a portfolio. So looking at the vision and corporate goals of the organization, creating a strategic plan, ensuring your portfolio is prioritized in line with that strategic plan, taking into account the business as usual and the projects and process. And then you're going into a review phase and assessing a performance phase, which then loops back around to reassess into the strategic plan to show what has been delivered, what hasn't been delivered, and therefore what one needs to prioritize next time around the loop. You're also managing the risk of that portfolio. That's very much your portfolio delivery assurance, and ensuring that that risk management activity is reducing the risk of your portfolio, increasing the value you are pushing out the end. So in terms of the benefits you're delivering and the goals you are delivering. Interestingly enough, what's difficult about it is that this approach is not specifically the individual strands, so whether it's prioritization or risk management. The challenging bit I always find about this is how do you bring those two worlds together so that your assessment of risk is essentially feeding into the prioritization and optimization activity, because they're often done by different parts of the portfolio office. So for me, a really important part of building any portfolio office is making sure that both the prioritization aspect and the risk reduction aspect are talking to each other and helping each other to achieve the goals that they need to deliver. The third model is what I call a service-based model. Now, this is looking at specifically the portfolio office and the services the portfolio office might deliver. This is a P2 consulting model. And for us, there will be a whole load of information, a whole load of activity within the portfolio office, but it's incredibly important to focus on the value of doing those things. And for us, the value of doing those things is really threefold. It's being able to provide an optimized portfolio, being able to assure the delivery of that portfolio, and being able to provide leadership to the portfolio. And I've always defined leadership as creating an environment that supports decision making, because ultimately with any office you're building, what you're trying to do is create an environment that supports stakeholders to make effective decisions rapidly. So optimization, delivery, and leadership, but all of that is driven by the various services that are offered by the portfolio office, and we call that as the engine room, the thing that actually drives those services. So if you look at the specific services you might want to offer, they either fall in the portfolio optimization space, and for us that would be the alignment of strategy, benefits delivery and tracking, creating stage gate and quality to review to make sure those benefits are being delivered, risk and issue management to allow the optimization activity itself, and of course the reporting and governance that sits around that. And then on the delivery assurance side, you'd have the delivery standards. So actually, how should people be operating to deliver good P3M? The planning activity, the dependency activity, which you talked about a bit earlier, business implementation planning. So ensuring that what your portfolio is creating is ready to be received by the business and the business has capacity to do that. Demand management. So actually, do you have the capability and capacity within your organization to deliver the proposed portfolio? And of course, reporting and governance around the delivery assurance so that everyone is aware of where the risks are and is acting to minimize those risks. So that third model is what I call a service-based model. Now, of course, you'll be saying to me right now that actually most of the models I've looked at feel fairly waterfall. and I think that's a fair challenge. A lot of portfolio activity tended to ignore the world of Agile, at least until the last few years. And in fact, if you're very committed to Agile, you may turn around to me and say portfolio management has absolutely no role in an Agile transformation. But actually, portfolio management has become quite popular in the Agile world in recent years, particularly driven by Scaled Agile and the SAFe framework. This is the lean portfolio management model that's a key part of SAFe version 5. And it pulls a lot from traditional areas of portfolio management. Because, of course, the really critical thing about portfolio management is value. Portfolio management is about defining what value means to the business and to the customer, and ensuring that the projects and the programs align to that. When both Agile and Waterfall methodologies both agree massively on the importance of delivering value. So taking that as its sort of touchstone, you can then redesign the portfolio approach around value to work in an Agile environment. The methodology SAFe applies looks at really 4 very important things. So it's about connecting the portfolio to the enterprise strategy. That's about really defining what value means at the enterprise level. Managing a portfolio vision and roadmap. These have very specific terms in the SAFe world, but it's essentially about trying to show a high-level roadmap of the big blocks of value that need to drop into the organization, so that the individuals running parts of the portfolio are able to ensure that what they're building aligns to that roadmap and are able to make prioritization decisions at their level. Establishing lean budgets and guardrails. So a very big part of portfolio management is, if you like, putting in the safety net that ensures that no change activity spends too much money or develops too much risk into the organization. And SAFe embraces that, and they have a concept of lean budgets and guardrails so that people know what their powers are to prioritize within. So they know how much money they can spend, they know what they have the authority to do, and then within that level of authority, they can do what they need to best deliver value. And establishing portfolio flow. And that's really about making sure that portfolio is aligned around key value streams. We know very clearly what value means to the organization. We know how much money we have to spend to deliver that value. That will allow the delivery teams to deliver that value in a very smooth and flowing fashion. There's an awful lot more beneath lean portfolio management, and it's well worth an exploration if you're interested in the world of Agile and particularly how it aligns to portfolio management. Now, the final how I wanted to pull out is actually not specifically a portfolio management methodology tool, but there's been a really interesting movement in the world of portfolio management recently. Essentially away from this dichotomy that says a business has 2 worlds. There is the business as usual, and then there is the change management activity, and never the twain shall meet. In recent years, there's been quite a move to say, well, why do we do that? Why do we not just treat an organization as one big thing and actually it's continuously changing and changing? So portfolio management should worry about the change of activity for the entire organization. The model I've stuck up in front here is a model that's quite recently come out. It's one developed by a chap called Geoffrey Moore in his most recent book, Zone to Win. Geoffrey Moore, if you don't know, is the chap who came up with the concept of the chasm, the book called Crossing the Chasm. So essentially how organizations innovate and how you take new ideas and then manage to cross the chasm so they become the mainstream. So very, very popular, very good author. I strongly recommend you read some of his books. His particular book, Zone to Win, is essentially looking at the disruptive environment we come in and actually how organizations like Microsoft and Salesforce deal with that. And what this model is essentially saying is that ignore the idea of business like as usual and change activity. What you really need to be doing is working out which of your activities sits in one of 4 zones. There's the performance zone, which is essentially the kind of day-to-day sales activity. There's the productivity zone, which is essentially improvement to that day-to-day activity that allows you to do that stuff cheaper and more effective. There's the incubation zone, which is really where you're hothousing the new entrepreneurial ideas in your business. And there's the transformation zone, which is where you've decided to fundamentally change your business to either be a disruptor or to meet the challenges of a disruptor. So classic example would be Microsoft when it's decided it needs to get into the cloud-based industry. Suddenly the cloud-based activity sat in the transformation zone and they were looking to fundamentally change the performance zone. In this model, what portfolio management is essentially doing is less about optimizing change activity, and it's more about saying, based on where we are in the sales cycle, what zone do we focus on? So in good times, you're focusing on the performance zone with a bit of focus around productivity to actually ensure you're delivering it cheaper and more effectively. In difficult times of disruption, suddenly all focus goes to the transformation zone, and the entire organization pivots to try and make the next big idea become the business as usual for the organization. So it's a really interesting idea. It's certainly not universal, but I think there's a lot of mileage in thinking about transformation less as purely a change activity and more as an entire organization activity. So there's zone to win, really good one to have a look at. So we've talked through 5 hows. I'm now going to try and launch a bit of a poll, because actually one of the things we've been really interested to hear is what type of portfolio management occurs in your organization. And really, I think there's kind of 4 options. We have no portfolio management. You have portfolio management that's focused purely on optimization, i.e. making sure you're doing the right change. You have portfolio management that's focused very much on delivery assurance, i.e. making sure you're doing the thing right. Or ideally, you have both. So I'm just going to launch that, and we'll revisit that at the end of the session. So that poll has been opened. We'll see how we get on with that. So we've got a few more minutes left. So in the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to do a small plug, that's okay, for the book, the guide that we've recently brought out through the APM. It's called A Practitioner's Guide to Portfolio Management. And what we look to really do with this guide is draw on the knowledge of the members of the SIG, all of whom are portfolio professionals, to give really sort of meaty real-world examples of where portfolio management has succeeded, where it's failed, and some of the top tips and the like. And we try and focus not just on how one delivers good portfolios, but also on how do you create that burning bridge, that burning platform that gets the senior stakeholders excited and engaged in portfolio management to help you generate a need for the organization. Because as I mentioned a bit earlier, one of the really important things about any portfolio management approach is to ensure that you have absolute senior stakeholder buy-in. One of the things we focus on quite a lot in the book is top tips for each of the different processes and each of the different stages. And I thought I'd share with you some of the top tips that we came up, particularly my top 3 favorite top tips. I think number 1, and absolutely critically, is whenever you're implementing a portfolio approach, treat it like a project. Like any other project, you need to show improvements, you need to show why it's delivering towards the strategy, the overall ROI, and manage the metrics on that. You need to be explaining what the value of this thing is. One of the really hard things about portfolio management is, I mentioned a bit earlier, that it's a permanent thing. So actually, when you stand up a portfolio office, it's supposed to be there, as long as the organization's running. The real trouble with that is actually people lose attention. It loses the attention of the senior stakeholders. So whereas a program can always be present in the mind because you know it's ending and it's got an end date, portfolio doesn't. So one of the really important things about building a portfolio office is actually stage managing the engagement with the stakeholders so they get excited and are engaged in that. A big part of that is showing the value, and another big part of that is how would you bring on new services over time. So each new time they engage with you as a portfolio office, they are seeing something new and exciting. So number 1, absolutely show the value of portfolio management at every single stage. Number 2, it's incredibly important to be able to prioritize the strategic goals of the organization around an unambiguous set of rules. Almost before anything else around portfolio management, there needs to be an understanding of what value means to the organization. Because without that understanding of value, you can't really prioritize your portfolio, and you don't really know how you're going to reduce your risk because you don't really know what are the really important parts of the portfolio. So even if it's a real thing in the air, make sure you have some sense of what really matters to your organization, and that the C-suite is brought into that understanding what matters to your organization. And third, be consistent and be fair. If you've sat down and agreed some rules around value, you need to be the champion of those rules. You need to be the person who is saying what those rules are and trying to be the referee of that. Now, I've never known a portfolio whereby all the senior stakeholders will agree a set of rules beforehand around how the portfolio is going to be prioritized and stick to that. Just not how it works. But it's really important to be able to say there are rules, even if you have to flex them based on the importance of the individual making decision. So there you have my top 3 recommendations. And that about brings us to the end of the session. Just before I finish off, interesting enough, if I share these polls with you, I'm seeing that of what's been said, 35% of the attendees are saying that both delivery and optimization, of course, 30% are saying delivery assurance, 15% optimization, and 20% are saying none. So there we have. That's interesting stuff there. We've got a range of other webinars lined up. We've got one on Lean Agile PMO on the 16th and one on the value-added PMO on the 23rd. We'll be looking to do a range of others beyond that, looking at the different aspects of services we at P2 provide. I hope you find that useful. I hope you've enjoyed the last half hour. As I say, do feel free to LinkedIn to me. Do feel free to LinkedIn to P2 on LinkedIn and drop me any questions you want to on the emails attached. Thanks very much indeed.